Welcome back to Geomancy. As always, thank you for joining me. This week, we're going to look at some of the techniques and methods that I use to find interesting sites, connections, and just associations amongst buildings. After all, geomancy is the art of placing or arranging buildings or other sites auspiciously. So, we're going to start in Philadelphia, as I've started many videos. We're going to start in City Hall, okay? So this is actually the first alignment that I ever recognized, and I kind of stumbled upon it. So I'm going to make a point from here in City Hall, the center, and as you can see, there's all kinds of great sites nearby. There's the Masonic building. I'm going to make a line from the center of City Hall all the way to New York City, right up here to Governor's Island, okay? And there's a star fort, Fort J, right here on Governor's Island. So I'm going to connect from the center of here to the center of City Hall, and this is what I get. I get this perfect line that somehow comes precisely out of the southwest corner of this star fort. I mean, you can see the buildings there. Everything is precision out of there. So you know these buildings are aligned. It's kind of hard to refute that. Now look what I find. Okay, this is what I started to notice. Along this line, like many other ley lines, you find sites of significance in terms of energy. So I find a lot of energy processing facilities, whether it's gas, electric, hydro, etc., refineries. But I also find places of human energy, so like schools, churches, and places of congregation. So look what we see. We're not going to look along this entire thing, but I'll show you. And by the way, we do pass another star fort, the Statue of Liberty. So this is what we see, right? Immediately, we're passing some sort of facility, gas looks like, and then we're gonna cut over many things. There's a school, and I know it's easy to argue that ley lines are not significant. Here's a lake, that they're just random. You know, you can make lines between anything and find some symbolism. Sure, but just wait, okay? Here's a whole school, College of Staten Island, an archery range, a park. Now this is where we start to see something is interesting. This wildlife refuge has these mounds, Fresh Kills Park, and here going directly over the top of the North Mound, right? Not even a little bit. So if a mound is placed along a ley line, it's got to be something to it. And here you find the rest of the park, right? Pretty significant. There's an Amazon facility. More energy. Some of it not in use, but some of it still in use. And look, even this goes directly over the center. So it's like the engineers of this current reality they must know something about the previous reality. And it's where we get a lot of our infrastructure and energy. This Raritan River is very interesting. So here we go. This is in Sayreville, New Jersey. Sayreville was actually home to a large brick processing facility, for what it's worth, as I've talked about. But we get this old mill or refinery or something, and nearby a lot of this what looks like it could have been a neighborhood, not too unlike what's right here. So we wonder with this, is this natural? I mean, does nature create such perfect engineering, it looks like? And many researchers, such as Michelle Gibson and others, have talked about these S-shaped rivers and how they were not natural as we've been taught. They were part of the geoengineering of the previous civilization. But it is interesting to note that this town of Sayreville, it was involved in the reset in a big way. And if you look into Sayreville brickmaking, you'll find some interesting stuff. So I wonder if they were just taking over from before. Anyway, there's a golf course, also a mound, and let me zoom out a little bit. We'll cut to the chase. So this line runs parallel to I-95, and I-95 is one of the main interstates in North America on the East Coast. Makes sense that they would put a main interstate along a ley line. Think about it. When you're driving on a road, there's usually two directions. So that's positive and negative. The colors of the lights on the cars are red in the back and white in the front. So that's also positive and negative. They show how this realm works in so many ways. We just don't pay any attention. But as we get into Philadelphia, you're going to see that we pass along a lot of points of significance. The Delaware River, this is where William Penn was said to have come down when he arrived in Philly. And what's interesting is that when we're in Philly, so remember it went out of the southwest corner of Fort J. Well, it's going out of the northeast corner of City Hall, precisely. And it also hits many other cornerstones of buildings. And you can see this city just is definitely planned in some sort of higher level. And I've covered that ad nauseum. But I'm showing you these techniques because I don't live where you live. I live in the greater Philly area, so I'm familiar with this. But you can apply these same techniques to wherever you live, and you might find some interesting connections and alignments. So extending that a little further, I went back to New York, right? And I noticed that right here at Fort J, this northern point, you see, this is going straight up Lower Manhattan. It makes a perfect line. So I can tell that Lower Manhattan seemed to be engineered in alignment with this fort. And I've covered who was in this region. The Dutch. This was called New Amsterdam before it was New York. And let's see what happens when I make a line here, okay? So first I just took it and I went straight up. And right off the bat, this is cutting through the Battery. So this is going through the part of New York formerly known as the Battery. I wonder why they call it that. Could it have to do with this energetic grid? Then it goes straight through the former World Trade Center location and directly through the present One World Trade Center. So this, you can't make this stuff up. Then it proceeds down the pier, and without even hitting the water, this line just goes straight off. And I just connected it to end it, so I went to a nearby park in North Bergen, New Jersey, so we could see just where it goes. But already you know that this is some pretty high level geometry. I mean, they wouldn't do this for no reason. You wouldn't have this site, which is obviously, I don't even need to get into this. This would not be on this ley line for nothing. And if you remember a couple videos back, I actually showed a map from this region from New Amsterdam from the 1600s, and it showed this same exact location where the Twin Towers resided with this mark. You can see it right here. So you tell me, do you think there is something behind these ley lines or not? I don't know. I just make the connections. So going a little further, I wanted to see what would happen just extending this. And I went ahead and just went to Canada. So this angle This interior angle is the interior angle of an octagon. And I know that from the direction these are pointing, right? Now, what happens if I put an octagon over top of this? All right, this is what happens. So now I've got this octagon overlaid, right? More or less. It's not perfect. It's hard to, I'm using basic tools that we all have access to. But what I noticed with this octagon and how I stationed it based on these ley lines is that it does cross through many significant cities along the Northeast and Midwest. I mean, we've got Philadelphia, Wilmington, Baltimore, Washington, D.C., Charlottesville, Virginia. We've got Charleston, West Virginia, which is the capital. We've got many, many different places. I've got Cincinnati, Indianapolis, right? So I noticed that there are many, many significant sites along this octagon. So that wasn't enough, right? I had to go ahead a little further and just, okay, what if I make a few more? And now, here's a northeast quadruplet. We'll call this a quatrefoil, because look at it. It looks just like a quatrefoil. And what do we find at the center of this one? We find New England. Specifically, every state that's in New England is within this centerpiece. And it's interesting to note that New England is where we're told the first settlers came to the New World. Right, so they came to the center of this quatrefoil. Now, me being me, I had to go ahead and just do all of North America. So this is what we get, going down into Central America. And I may work on this further at some point, right? But I did find some significance and notice some things. So what I find is that many significant cities or places, including state capitals, not every single state capital, but many state capitals happen to be along this grid. And again, you can tell me I'm being ridiculous. I don't really care. I'm just observing. I mean, what's wrong with being observant and coming up with patterns? How is anything done in the world, right? If you go ahead and do this and look along these lines, you might find interesting things that I overlooked. So I can see up in the Northeast, many of these star forts are laced along here. And actually, let me hide the star forts just to make it a little cleaner. We've got many significant cities, sites. Florida practically has its own. Bermuda, interesting to note that Bermuda, this tiny little island, also gets its own entire octagon. Perhaps that's why anomalous things happen in that little triangle, we're told. And I'm not exactly sure where the Bermuda Triangle is, but wouldn't it be something if it was right in this axis? But here we go on the West Coast. So what could there be out west, right? What's significance? Well, when I look up on this axis, this is where Silicon Valley is, and YouTube and everything that we take for granted in our modern world basically comes out of this region, we're told. I can't leave this exact file, but you can go ahead and download Google Earth Pro and you can import an image and you can do the same technique and find things. Again, Michelle Gibson has done a lot of this kind of work with tetrahedrons and more advanced geometry, but this was an interesting project and I think worth noting. And I came up with this whole thing just on these two ley lines. I'm happy to be wrong about any of this. I'd be interested to connect to Europe and Africa and other parts of the world and find other connections. But for example, in this octagon, this region right here is the Four Corners, where Utah, Colorado, New Mexico, and Arizona meet. I speculate that something big of epic proportions happened here, and if you look, this looks almost circular, like a bomb dropped. And if you go to this region, kind of look like Mars. Looks like a different realm, like something happened. So maybe different places along this grid has significance. What do you think? These are just observations and things that I can connect. Next, we're going to look at some things that I have dug up in my own backyard and some places that are not too far from where I live. I was digging a hole in my yard to plant a plant, as you do, and about a foot down was surprised to hit some hard materials that didn't quite feel like rock. I pulled them out, and this is what I had. There was some ceramic and glass, a piece of anthracite coal, and then a composite material that had coal, stone, and brick combined. They say in my area that many of the yards were landfill. I'm not exactly sure what that means or how it was done, but having an understanding of mud floods, perhaps these places were fill of mud after some event caused it. And I could have pulled out a lot more artifacts, but I wasn't playing archaeologist that day. I was actually trying to plant some things. But here you get a closer look. Not really sure what it is. Interesting to note. So a little after that, I was driving in random Pennsylvania. This is Frackville, and noticed this church on an old mound. And nearby, this is Pottsville, Pennsylvania, a small to medium city, town. But there was something in particular that caught my eye from the roadway, and it's these two beauties. Why would some small town that most people have never heard of need something like this? We're looking at the Schuylkill County Courthouse and the Schuylkill County Prison. It's also worth noting that Schuylkill is a Dutch word, if I'm not mistaken, taken from the earlier Dutch inhabitants. But the land of Pottsville, we are told, was granted to William Penn by King Charles II of Great Britain. If you've watched some of my videos, I've talked about the British royal family and what they actually may have appeared to be, given many historical records and artifacts. And this would actually line up with some of the other things I've talked about, including William Penn. But my question is, why does a town like this in Pennsylvania need these buildings that were said to have been built in the late 1800s? Perhaps they were built much, much sooner. I'm not sure. Getting a closer look at this sign here tells you about an Irish secret society, the Molly Maguires. Interesting bit of history, also related to coal. And yeah, this site seems to have much historical significance. So when I go to places, even small towns, any town USA, I look for these types of buildings, and I'm not surprised when I find them. It seems like the smallest places that people have never heard of have some of the most impressive buildings. And you really gotta ask the question, why did these people need structures like this at a time when the populations were much lower? Did they need a prison that big? How many people were locked up? I mentioned in the previous America is the Old World that I look for retaining walls like this because they can tell you that something of significance is usually above and below. And look at this courthouse. Looks to be solid masonry construction. So how would they have done this in 1889 in this small little place? When I go to these places with this set of eyes, I take into account the number of other places that have the same exact story. And this is where the questions start to add up. Who's the workforce that's putting together these incredible things? How was it built in the time it was said to have been built? Did the location warrant a need for this? Were these places remnants of a previous civilization? And when you go out into the town, you start to see clues of old world mud flood, typical reset evidence. But then we also see some of the newer homes and just building styles that are clearly last 100 years or so. Here you can see these homes down this main street are brick, much old, and they have raised entrances, a refacaded church, a war memorial. These are all the same clues that we find everywhere. Could these just be the repurposing of previous towns and cities? It is hard to believe that in the late 1800s, everywhere across the United States was being built the same way. And for some reason, they chose building styles that reflect time periods hundreds of years earlier. How were the people capable and skilled at putting together these types of things? Or were many of these buildings there? When I look into the history and I see that the King of Great Britain is involved with this place and William Penn is involved with this place, already I start to have questions. I study the architectural forms to know that that is a stepped gable, which is common in the Netherlands and Germany. So we know that there seem to be familiar faces involved in this area. Alright, so here's a little bonus, interesting or not. I had mentioned Sayreville, New Jersey, along that ley line, and there were some interesting facilities, processing plants, and whatnot. I also mentioned that it was home to brick manufacturing, so listen to this. Originally known as Roundabout for the river bends in the area, which I said were not quite natural, and then as Wood's Landing, the community was renamed in the 1860s for James R. Sayer Jr. of Newark, who co-founded Sayer and Fisher Brick Company in the 1850s together with Peter Fisher. It was one of the many companies that took advantage of the extensive clay deposits that supported the brick industry from the early 19th century until 1970. From its inception, Sayer and Fisher quickly grew into one of the largest brickmaking companies in the world. Production grew from 54 million bricks annually in 1878 to 178 million bricks a year in 1913, and had reached a total of 6.2 billion bricks in the 100 years through its centennial in 1850. Well, that is pretty neat, but check this out also about Sayreville. So I learned about this place a couple years ago when I had started researching this line. And this is somebody's blog, a blog about forgotten and demolished buildings in New Jersey. Sounds right up my alley. So they say, I'd first noticed a small complex of brick buildings while running errands for work. I noticed a sign that said Old Waterworks Road. I wondered if the road's namesake was still around. Sure enough it was, and the buildings appeared to be in really bad shape. I soon returned to find out what was left of the facility. So they took some pictures. It turns out all the old pumping equipment was removed some time ago. Both the larger buildings were just brick shells being used to store mulch and wood chips. Hey, that sounds like that shell of a building that I have shown in Greenville. But check this out. So it gets interesting. Again, because we study the architectural forms and motifs, and I've left trails. The real ones will know what this architectural form is, what this gable is. That's a Dutch gable. So I've talked about that and where it comes from, what part of the world, who designed it, who engineered it. It's interesting that we are finding this in disused equipment in New Jersey. New Jersey used to be called New Sweden. New York used to be called New Amsterdam. So maybe these are clues of the former civilization. Here they've put up the Perth Amboy township badge, but who knows? It could have been something different previously. I just thought this was interesting. This person, good job on the exploration, and I wonder what else is in this area that was not still standing. What do you think? In any case, thank you for watching as always. Have a good one. Share this with somebody. Take care. Stay blessed.